Something is happening right now in the Taiwan Strait that Beijing's military planner have spent 2 decades trying to prevent. And the most alarming part is not the weapons that just arrived. It is where they are positioned, how they are networked, and what they can do to a fleet of ships trying to cross 100 miles of open water before a single Chinese soldier ever sets foot on a beach. For years, the question around Taiwan was simple. China has more ships, more planes, more missiles, and more soldiers. How does a small island survive a military superpower that has been preparing for this specific war since the 1990s? That question had no comfortable answer. Until now. Because what the United States just built in Taiwan is not a single weapon. It is an entire architecture of destruction. A layered, distributed, AI-networked killing system designed around one specific purpose. To make the Taiwan Strait the most lethal 100 miles of water on the planet for any invasion fleet that attempts to cross it. And when you see what is already in place and what is still being rushed in ahead of the 2027 deadline that China itself set, you start to understand something that most analysts have been reluctant to say out loud. China's entire invasion plan may already be obsolete before the first shot is ever fired. Let us go back to the beginning of this, because the timeline matters more than most people realize. In January 2023, the former commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Phil Davidson, testified before Congress and said something that changed the entire calculus of American defense planning. He said China's military had been given a specific directive. Be ready to seize Taiwan by 2027, not 2035, not 2040, 2027. That is the year Xi Jinping's People's Liberation Army was ordered to have the capability to conduct a successful invasion of Taiwan's main island, even if the United States intervened. The Davidson window, as it became known, set a clock running in Washington, in Taipei, and in every defense ministry in the Indo-Pacific. And it revealed something deeply uncomfortable. At the time the Davidson window became public, Taiwan was not ready, not even close. Its military was equipped with a mix of aging systems, some of them decades old. Its reserve force was undertrained, its beaches were not mined, its missile inventory was small, and the American weapons transfer process, designed for peacetime timelines, was delivering equipment on schedules measured in years, sometimes a decade. A Taiwanese government requesting a weapon system in 2020 might not receive it before 2030. Against a 2027 deadline, that pace was not a delay. It was a catastrophe in the making. But what happened next was not a slow bureaucratic response. It was a scramble. The Pentagon began rerouting weapons deliveries that would normally take 5 to 10 years through the standard foreign military sales process. New legal authorities were created, new funding channels were opened. The Presidential Drawdown Authority, the same mechanism used to rush weapons to Ukraine in the early days of that war, was made available to Taiwan for the first time. 3 separate drawdown packages totaling $1.5 billion were announced in rapid succession. The Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative was created specifically to bypass the old foreign military sales timelines, allowing direct procurement through Pentagon channels and immediate transfer from American military stocks. The deliveries that followed were not symbolic. They were specific, calculated, and pointed directly at the single most dangerous military problem the United States has ever had to solve. How do you stop the largest amphibious invasion force ever assembled from crossing a stretch of water before it is too late to stop it? The answer they built has several layers, and each one is more formidable than the last. The first layer is the missiles. In January 2025, Taiwan received the first 16 MGM-140 Army tactical missile systems, known as ATAC-MS. These are not short-range defensive weapons. They are precision-guided ballistic missiles with a range of up to 300 kilometers. That range is significant because it means Taiwan can now strike targets not just in the strait, not just on the Chinese coast, but deep into the Chinese mainland. The ports where invasion ships are loaded, the naval bases where aircraft carriers depart, the missile facilities that would launch the opening salvos of any attack. By August 2025, Taiwan had procured enough additional high-mobility artillery rocket systems to bring its total to 57 HIMARS units, with a full order expected to complete in 2026, potentially bringing the total to more than 100. Each HIMARS can launch precision rockets at targets 80 kilometers away. 100 HIMARS spread across Taiwan's western coast, networked together, targeting ships crossing the strait, is not a defensive capability. It is a systematic destruction machine. Every ship in a Chinese invasion fleet would be within range, within minutes of departing its port. But this is where things take a serious turn. Because the missiles are only the beginning. Taiwan's coastline is now being seeded with something that the military community calls a porcupine strategy. But what it actually represents is closer to a death trap in depth. Naval mines, thousands of them, are being stockpiled to be deployed across the shallow waters of the Western Strait the moment a crossing begins. The Taiwan Strait averages about 180 meters deep in the north and shallower in the south, with the narrowest crossing points favored by any invasion plan being particularly suited for mining. A fleet of ships sailing through a minefield while simultaneously being targeted by over 100 HIMARS systems and nearly 85 ATACMS missiles is not an invasion. It is a catastrophe in slow motion. But what most people do not realize is that mines and missiles are the simplest part of what has been constructed. Taiwan's 4th PAC-3 Patriot Air Defense Battalion became operational in 2025. The Norwegian Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System, NASAMS, is now deployed on the island. And Taiwan is simultaneously fielding thousands of FIM-92 Stinger missiles on the ground, giving every infantry company a short-range air defense capability that would make even low-altitude helicopter insertions into Taiwan's beaches extraordinarily costly. Any PLA amphibious operation would need massive air support. But flying that air support through a layered air defense network involving Patriots, NASAMS, Stingers, and Taiwan's own Tianqian surface-to-air missile systems means every aircraft in the assault is flying into an electromagnetic kill zone. The attrition rates that military models project for Chinese air forces attempting to support a landing are so severe that multiple wargame simulations have concluded China would lose the ability to maintain air superiority over the landing zones within the first 72 hours. And without air superiority, no amphibious landing in history has ever succeeded. Now, there's one more dimension that ties all of this together, and it is the reason that the phrase useless invasion fleet is not an exaggeration. China's invasion plan has always relied on a specific concept: mass. Overwhelming numbers of ships, soldiers, vehicles, and aircraft crossing simultaneously, accepting heavy losses in the initial wave to establish a beachhead, and then reinforcing faster than Taiwan can repel them. The math of mass says that if you throw enough at a target, some of it gets through. The entire Chinese People's Liberation Army doctrine for Taiwan is built around this logic. Accept the losses. Win through volume. What the United States has built in Taiwan specifically defeats that logic, not by matching China's numbers, but by making the cost of each ship lost, each aircraft lost, each soldier lost so catastrophically high that the math of mass stops working. Consider what a 100-ship invasion fleet crossing the Taiwan Strait now faces: long-range anti-ship missiles launched from HIMARS and ATAC-MS before the fleet even leaves Chinese territorial waters. Submarine-launched Harpoon missiles, Taiwan now having over 400 in inventory, closing from beneath the surface. Mines waiting in the shallow crossing zones. F-16 aircraft armed with Harpoon and Wanqian standoff missiles attacking from above. Patriot and NASAMS batteries destroying any aircraft trying to provide air cover. And distributed ground forces armed with Stingers, Javelins, and AT-4 anti-armor weapons waiting on every beach worth landing on. And there is one element of that picture that rarely gets the attention it deserves: the submarine dimension. Taiwan has been operating older Guppy-class submarines that were frankly embarrassing relative to the threat they faced, but the pressure on Washington to assist with Taiwan's undersea capability has been building since 2023, and the conversation around providing submarine-related technology, training, and possibly even leased submarines under AUKUS-adjacent arrangements has been part of the defense cooperation discussions that are now running in parallel with the weapons deliveries. A single modern attack submarine operating in the shallow approaches to Taiwan's western coast is not just a weapons platform. It is a deterrent for every ship that must cross to reach it. A Chinese admiral who cannot account for the location of Taiwan's undersea assets cannot safely order his fleet into the crossing zone. The uncertainty alone slows the operation, which is what the entire porcupine strategy is. Designed to create time, hesitation, cost. Every second of delay is another salvo from a HIMARS battery. Every minute of hesitation is another flight of F-16s closing from the east. Every layer of that system increases what military planners call the cost exchange ratio. For China to land enough soldiers to overwhelm Taiwan, it now needs to lose so many ships, aircraft, and men in the crossing itself that the invasion force that reaches the beaches may be too depleted to actually take and hold the island. Military analysts running the numbers have begun saying something genuinely remarkable. A PLA amphibious assault against a fully armed Taiwan supported by American weapons systems does not achieve its objective. It fails, possibly catastrophically. But here is what makes this even more consequential. This is not even the final picture. The United States announced in April 2026 a $2 billion Taiwan security package, split between direct weapons assistance and equipment from American military stocks under the Presidential Drawdown Authority. The Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative, which was authorized at $300 million in fiscal year 2025, was expanded to $1 billion in fiscal year 2026. That funding is enabling direct procurement through Pentagon channels joint development of unmanned systems, counter-drone technology, and something that barely made the news, but changes the strategic picture fundamentally: production. American and Taiwanese companies building weapons together on the island itself. That means future deliveries will not depend on ships crossing the Pacific. Taiwan will be manufacturing its own deterrent force from within its own borders. You cannot sanction away or blockade a production line that is already inside the castle walls. What about China's advantages? Because China has not been standing still. Xi Jinping's military build has been extraordinary. China's defense spending has nearly doubled since he took power, with actual spending estimated at between $304 billion and $377 billion in 2024, significantly higher than the official figure of $231 billion. China now has 134 airfields within 1,000 miles of Taiwan, with approximately 650 hardened aircraft shelters. Its navy has grown to become the world's largest by hull count. The PLA has developed anti-ship ballistic missiles specifically designed to destroy aircraft carriers at long range. The DF-21D and DF-26 are called carrier killers. They are designed to make the Taiwan defense scenario impossible for the United States by holding American carriers so far back that their aircraft cannot reach the strait. And there is one more piece of China's strategy that Western analysts have spent years warning about: mass civilian shipping. China's plan is not to rely solely on military vessels for the initial crossing. It is to use civilian cargo ships, ferries, and roll-on, roll-off vessels commandeered from the world's largest merchant fleet to deliver mass infantry to Taiwan's beaches. Soldiers packed into civilian ships, mixed with military vessels, crossing simultaneously and accepting losses in the opening wave to establish multiple beachheads before Taiwan's forces can respond everywhere at once. The sheer volume of targets would overwhelm any conventional defense. 1,000 ships cannot all be sunk before enough of them reach the shore. Or so the plan assumed. Because here is the dimension of Taiwan's new defense architecture that changes even the mass civilian shipping calculation. The 38 M1A2T Abrams main battle tanks that arrived in December 2024, with 70 more arriving in 2025 and 2026, are not sitting in storage. They are positioned at and around Taiwan's limited viable landing zones. Taiwan's western coast is mountainous, densely populated, and crisscrossed with terrain that channels any large-scale landing force into predictable corridors. Those corridors are now covered. An infantry force that survives the strait crossing and makes it to the beach still faces 108 of the world's most capable main battle tanks, waiting behind the seawall. The drone dimension is the piece that completes the picture. The Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative explicitly authorized joint development and co-production of unmanned systems. Drones, thousands of them. Ukraine's war with Russia has demonstrated beyond any doubt that cheap, proliferated drones in sufficient numbers can stop an armored advance, make logistics movements suicidal, and turn any contested zone into a kill zone for even the most protected ground forces. Taiwan, with American technology, American funding, and American production partnerships now being established on the island itself, is building exactly that capability. The soldiers who made it off the beach, past the Abrams, past the Javelin anti-armor teams, past the Stingers, still face an island blanketed with drone coverage that has no gaps and no safe corridors. But this is where the story takes one final turn that most people have missed entirely. The entire point is that Taiwan does not need American carriers to arrive quickly. Taiwan needs to survive the first wave long enough for the strategic, diplomatic, and economic costs to China to become unbearable. And the weapons now in place suggest Taiwan can do exactly that. But Taiwan is not alone in this equation. And this is the dimension that transforms the entire picture from a Taiwan defense problem into a regional deterrence architecture that China has no answer to. The United States has spent the last 3 years building what military planners call a forward deployed arc of force across the first island chain. Multi-domain task forces, units specifically designed for high-threat environments that integrate long-range precision fires, cyber operations, air defense, and electronic warfare, are now positioned across Guam, Japan, and the Philippines. These forces create overlapping fields of fire that extend deep into the strait. A Chinese fleet leaving its home ports would not enter a neutral body of water. It would enter a web of detection, tracking, and targeting that stretches from the Ryukyu Islands in the north to the Philippine Sea in the south. Every ship that sails, every aircraft that takes off, every helicopter that launches toward Taiwan's beaches is immediately visible to a network of sensors that has no gaps and no dead zones. And the American weapons reaching Taiwan are part of this larger system. The ATACMS missiles that can reach Chinese ports, the HIMARS that can strike ships mid-crossing, the Harpoon anti-ship missiles positioned along Taiwan's coast, the submarine force operating in the strait's approaches. Together with the multi-domain task forces on the outer islands, they create a kill chain that activates the moment the first Chinese ship leaves its berth and does not deactivate until the operation ends or the fleet turns back. What China built its invasion plan around was the idea that speed and mass could overwhelm this kind of defense before it could be fully brought to bear. Strike fast enough, land enough soldiers quickly enough, and the cost of reversing the invasion becomes too high for the international community to pay. That window of speed, that first 72 to 96 hours where China believed it had the advantage, is what the entire porcupine strategy is designed to close. And there is evidence that in Beijing, this reality is beginning to register. The Chinese military has been purging its own senior leadership at a rate that has alarmed Western intelligence agencies. Multiple senior PLA generals and admirals were removed in corruption investigations between 2023 and 2025. The head of the rocket force, which operates China's missile arsenal, was removed. Key figures in the defense acquisition sector were investigated. At first glance, these purges look like Xi tightening political control, but the pattern of who was removed and which programs they were responsible for has led some analysts to a more alarming conclusion. The corruption had reached deep into the weapons programs themselves. Missiles that were supposed to be filled with fuel had been filled with water to hide theft. Warheads that were supposed to be armed had been hollowed out. The invasion capability that China was building toward 2027 may have been partly fictitious, existing on paper and in briefings, but not in the actual operational status of the weapons themselves. If that is true, then the 2027 deadline is not just challenged by what the United States built in Taiwan, it is challenged by what China's own corruption did to the invasion force that was supposed to meet it. Taiwan spent roughly 2.5% of its GDP on defense in 2024. President Lai Ching-te has committed to raising that to 3.3% in 2026, representing approximately $31 billion. A special defense budget of an additional $40 billion spread over 8 years was proposed in November 2025. These are not peacetime budget lines. These are the spending levels of a country that has looked at the 2027 window, looked at what has been built on its shores and in its arsenals, and is now moving with a velocity that would have been unimaginable 5 years ago. The question that used to be asked about Taiwan was whether it could survive Chinese invasion long enough for help to arrive. That question has been quietly replaced by a different one. Whether China's military, with all of its modernization, its mass, its planning, and its 2-decade buildup, can successfully execute an amphibious landing against an island that is now armed with this density and this depth of killing capability. The answer that the weapons, the war games, and the military mathematics are converging on is one that Xi Jinping's generals in Beijing are looking at right now with very different eyes than they had even 18 months ago. The invasion plan that was going to be ready by 2027 was designed for a different Taiwan. A Taiwan that relied on aging tanks and outdated fighter jets. A Taiwan that needed to hope American carriers would arrive within days. A Taiwan whose beaches could be overwhelmed if China accepted the initial losses. That Taiwan no longer exists. What was built in its place is something that no invasion fleet, however massive, can approach without. Paying a price that makes the operation militarily incoherent and politically suicidal simultaneously. And somewhere in Beijing, the generals who spent 2 decades building a military for one specific mission are staring at maps of the Taiwan Strait and running the same numbers over and over, looking for a version where the math still works. They have not found it yet. And that is the most dangerous moment of all. Because a military power that has built its entire strategic identity around a specific operation, and then discovers that operation may be impossible, does not simply accept the new reality and stand down. It looks for a different approach, a blockade instead of an invasion, a cyber attack instead of a missile, strike, a political operation instead of a military one. The weapons that just made China's invasion plan obsolete did not make the conflict go away. They changed its shape. And what that shape looks like next is the question that keeps military planners awake on both sides of the Pacific. Because deterrence is only stable when both sides believe the cost of action is too high. The moment one side concludes the cost of inaction is even higher, everything changes. The weapons that just made an invasion nearly impossible did not eliminate the tension that makes one seem necessary to Beijing. They redirected it, and redirected pressure always finds a new path.